The story doesn't open in a penthouse. It doesn't open on a private jet, a boardroom, or a man in a tailored suit commanding a room full of people who are afraid of him. It opens on a floor, cold marble, pale morning light cutting through the tall windows of a $14 million estate in Boise, Idaho, and a man, one of the most powerful private investors in the entire Pacific Northwest, lying completely still, one arm stretched toward the front door, as if even at the very edge of losing consciousness, some part of him was still trying to handle it himself. He had been there for hours. His phone, face up on the marble beside him, showed 19 missed calls, every single one from his office. And somewhere in those final moments before everything went dark, he had managed to press one name. One. The call had rung out, gone to voicemail, and in that voicemail, his voice, barely above a breath, said only 7 words.
I think something is wrong. Please come.
Nobody came. His phone showed 19 missed calls, every single one, from his office. 0 from family. So let me ask you something, and I need you to really sit with it. What would you do if the only people you ever lived for couldn't find 1 hour for you when you were dying? He didn't have to wonder. He found out. Welcome to K Stories by Emma. Before we go any further, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, because this one is going to stay with you. He wasn't supposed to become anything. That's not cruelty, that's just the honest math of the neighborhood he came from, a cramped industrial district on the outskirts of Busan, South Korea, where the buildings always carried the faint smell of machine oil, and the winters came through the walls like they owned the place. A neighborhood where ambition wasn't crushed, it just wasn't taught, where the only question children learned to ask about their future was, what kind of work will you do? Not, what kind of life will you build? Lee Hyun-woo asked the second question. He was 10 years old the first time he did. His mother worked double shifts at a textile processing plant 6 days a week. His father carried a quiet, specific shame, the kind men of that generation were never given words for. The shame of working hard your entire life and still watching your wife count coins before buying rice. His older brother, Lee Sung-jin, dealt with it differently. Sung-jin learned young how to wear hardship lightly, how to turn on charm like a faucet and let the weight of things slide right off him. Life was easier that way. Feeling less made survival simpler. Hyun-woo couldn't do that. He felt everything, and then, instead of running from it, he studied it. Hi viewers, I want to ask you something personal before we go further. Drop it in the comments right now. Growing up, was there one moment that made you decide your life was going to be different? Tell me below. I read every single one. At 12, he was riding 3 buses to borrow economics textbooks from a school library he didn't even attend. At 14, he was tracking market movements in a second-hand notebook with a cracked spine, trying to decode why money moved the way it did, who controlled it, who understood it, and why the people working the hardest always seemed to have the least of it. Nobody told him to, nobody encouraged it. Something inside him simply refused to accept that what his family had was permanent. He didn't study to leave them behind. He studied to bring them with him. Every late night, every skipped social moment, every hour of discipline that made him strange and isolated among kids his age, none of it was for himself alone. It was for a specific image he kept in the back of his mind like a promise. His mother's hands finally resting, his father's shoulders finally down. The night that image became a vow, he was 16, standing in their narrow kitchen, watching his mother count coins on the counter, carefully, quietly, before she could afford to buy a single bag of rice. He watched her hands, and something locked inside him. No one in this family will ever struggle like this again, not while I can prevent it. It was a beautiful promise, and it was the most dangerous thing he ever said. Because unconditional promises, the kind that ask nothing in return, the kind built entirely from love and sacrifice, don't produce gratitude when they go on long enough. They produce expectation. And expectation, left unexamined, has a way of becoming something uglier than ingratitude. He didn't know that yet. He was 16. He only understood love as something you proved through what you gave. He kept that promise, every word of it. He built an empire from discipline and a mind that refused to accept limits. He lifted every person he loved out of that Busan kitchen, out of those thin walls, out of everything that had ever shrunk their lives down to coins on a counter. He gave them everything, and the day he needed someone to give him one single hour, he was lying on a marble floor in Boise, Idaho, completely alone, with a voicemail nobody answered. By the time Lee Hyun-woo was 35, financial publications had written dozens of profiles about him and still hadn't gotten close. They could report the numbers, the portfolio spanning 4 continents, the private investment headquarters sitting quietly but powerfully on the edge of downtown Boise, Idaho, a building that looked understated from the outside and controlled billions from within. They could print the estimates, the rankings, the square footage. What they couldn't capture was the stillness, that particular controlled watchfulness of a man who had trained himself to see 10 moves ahead and had long since stopped being surprised by anyone. What they also couldn't capture was the truth underneath the empire. Almost none of it existed for him alone. His elder brother, Lee Sung-jin, 41, sat on the board of a commercial investment group in Detroit, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, the kind of man whose confidence fills a room before he speaks, smooth, easy, arrived at effortlessly. What nobody at those Detroit board meetings knew was that the entire firm had been capitalized, staffed, and structured by Hyun-woo. Sung-jin had simply walked into the chair his younger brother built and pulled it up to the table. He smiled readily, agreed smoothly, made people feel seen while looking just slightly past them. His younger sister, Lee Ye-rin, 32, ran a lifestyle brand out of London, traveling between international events in Hong Kong, Paris, and New York on connections that Hyun-woo had spent years building. The brand's seed funding? His. The introductions that opened every important door? His. Ye-rin was genuinely talented, genuinely charming, and had genuinely stopped somewhere along the way, asking herself where the foundation under her feet actually came from. Then there was cousin Kwon Tae-suk, a Grand Rapids commercial real estate operator who posted quotes about grinding and hustle from a car Hyun-woo's money had purchased. He meant every word of those posts. He simply had a generous blind spot about the difference between hustle and inheritance. Now here is the part that matters. The part this story needs you to understand before everything that comes next. These were not villains. They were ordinary people, comfortable, self-focused in the completely unremarkable way that comfortable people often become. And slowly, so slowly that none of them could have named the exact moment it happened, they had stopped seeing Hyun-woo as a person and started seeing him as a system, a reliable infrastructure, the foundation of their lives that they stood on every single day without once looking down to check if it was holding. When you solve every problem before someone has to show up, you teach them that showing up isn't necessary. He had made himself indispensable, and in doing so, completely tragically, he had made himself invisible. The giving never paused, but the presents had dried up years ago. His family appeared when there was something to receive. They disappeared when there wasn't. And because Hyun-woo had never once named the ache of that, had never asked for anything beyond the transaction, nobody knew he was lonely. He barely knew it himself. But his body knew. The fatigue arrived first, the deep, structural kind that 8 hours of sleep couldn't touch. Then the chest tightness he blamed on coffee. Then the headaches arriving every afternoon like an appointment he hadn't made, staying through dinner uninvited. He ignored every signal, the way people ignore things they've decided aren't allowed to be real. The internal damage had been quietly accumulating for 2 full years. 2 years of warnings, 2 years of his body raising its hand, and not one person in his life positioned close enough or paying enough attention to notice. There is a specific kind of courage required to ask for help when you have spent your entire life being the one who provides it. It cuts against everything you've built, every identity you've reinforced, every morning you pushed through exhaustion because stopping felt like failure. Every time someone called your name in crisis and you answered without hesitation. To turn around and say, I need someone, when the entire world has only ever known you as the person others need, that is not weakness. That is one of the most honest things a human being can do. Lee Hyun-woo made those calls, and what happened next rewrote him permanently. The diagnosis came on a Thursday afternoon in October. Dr. Nadia William, his private physician, a Ghanaian-American woman of extraordinary precision who had long since decided that cushioning medical truth helped nobody, sat across from him in her Coeur d'Alene office and delivered it without softening a single syllable. Stress-induced organ deterioration, his liver, 1 kidney, 2 years of cortisol overload had been quietly dismantling him from the inside, the biological consequence of a man who had run at full capacity for over a decade without once genuinely stopping. This requires surgery, she said, high risk, and it requires you to stop before and after. He asked how serious. She held his gaze and told him exactly. He drove home, sat in the stillness of his 14-room Boise estate, and then he did something he had almost no muscle memory for. He picked up the phone and asked for help. Sung Jin first. Hyun-woo kept his voice deliberately steady. He had always managed himself that way in hard moments, controlled on the outside regardless of what moved underneath. He explained the diagnosis. He said plainly that he was frightened. He asked if Sung Jin could come to Boise. Sung Jin responded with impressive speed. Hyun, the board has an emergency session this week. I physically cannot cancel it. You know how these things work. I'll call you every day. Get some rest. He called Yerin. She gasped at the right moment, said, "Oh no, Oppa," told him she was in London for a brand partnership event scheduled months ago, then asked, with complete sincerity, "Can't they delay the surgery until I'm back?" As if a failing organ operated on her calendar. Taesak, I just launched the Grand Rapids property line. The timing is genuinely terrible. 3 cousins, 3 versions of the same response. Money transfer offers, recommendations for private nurses, confident reassurances that he would definitely be fine. He set the phone down. He sat inside a home that had never once been filled by the people he constructed his entire life to protect, and he felt something entirely new move through him, something he had no name for because he had never permitted himself to feel it before. Expendable. Not as a billionaire, not as a provider, as a person, a human being, terrified, asking simply not to be alone. He wasn't asking them to save him, he was asking them to sit with him, and even that was too much. What Hyun-woo didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until much later, was that 30 minutes after his call with Sung Jin ended, Sung Jin had called Tae-sok directly. The two of them spoke for 22 minutes, not about his health, not about the surgery, about the estate structure, about what a prolonged illness would mean for board voting rights. 22 minutes. That night, alone in a house that cost more than most people earn across 10 lifetimes, Lee Hyun-woo didn't sit on the sofa or retreat to his bedroom. He sat on the living room floor. Not because anything forced him there, because he was too exhausted to pretend furniture was the same as company. The next morning, he didn't make it to the door. Some people enter your life with noise, with grand announcements and unmistakable presence, the kind of entrance that makes a room turn. And then there are people who have simply always been paying attention while everyone else was looking somewhere else entirely. Adele Mensah was the second kind. 28 years old, Ghanaian American, born in Detroit, raised between Accra and Michigan in that particular way that builds a person with roots in two worlds and the quiet strength of belonging fully to both. She had relocated to Boise 3 years earlier for a position most people her age would have considered a reach. She didn't consider it a reach. She considered it a starting point. Her official title was Private Accounts Manager. What that meant in practice was that she held the financial nerve center of Hyun-woo's most sensitive operations, the accounts that didn't appear in public filings, the transactions that required discretion above credentials. She had earned that access the only way it could actually be earned, through 3 years of work so precise, so consistently exceptional, that trust had become the natural conclusion. Her mind moved through financial structures the way water moves through a channel, not forcing, just finding the most accurate path. She asked exactly the right questions, never one unnecessary one. But the thing that made Adele genuinely remarkable had nothing to do with numbers. She paid attention to people. She knew that Hyun-woo confirmed every Tuesday 9 a.m. briefing by 8:45, without exception. She knew he took every phone call standing. He had mentioned once, almost offhandedly, that sitting during a call made him feel like he was already conceding ground. She knew the specific way he framed worry as logistics. Is the timeline still viable? Because men who learned early to carry everything alone rarely ask directly if something is wrong. Tuesday morning, 8:45 came and went. No confirmation. By 9:15, 3 calls had gone unanswered. She felt it before she could explain it, the specific wrongness of a broken pattern in someone whose patterns never broke. She drove to his estate without second-guessing herself. She knocked. No answer. She contacted the security line. The guard confirmed. No outbound movement detected in over 4 hours. They entered together using the emergency key held on file. They found him on the living room floor, one arm extended toward the front door. He hadn't simply fallen, he had crawled. He had tried, even in that condition, to get there himself. Adele did not scream. She did not freeze. She was on the phone with emergency services before her knees hit the floor beside him, and she spoke to him the entire time they waited. Low, steady, completely present. "I'm here. You're not alone. Help is coming." In the ambulance, she held his head steady against every curve in the road. Her hands didn't shake once. Now, the narrator needs you to hold this. Her professional obligation ended at that front door. Everything after was purely a choice. No contract required it, no job description covered it. That is what real loyalty looks like. Not the kind people announce, the kind that simply moves. At the Coeur d'Alene facility, Dr. William delivered the assessment: 50% survival odds, high-risk surgery recommended within 24 hours. Hyun-woo asked for time to decide. The hospital contacted his listed emergency next of kin, Lee Sung-jin. The call went to voicemail. 3 hours into the wait, Adele opened her calendar and quietly canceled every obligation she carried for the entire week. She told no one why. She simply stayed. He had spent his whole life building an empire so the people he loved would never struggle, and the only person who came, the only one, owed him nothing but a professional contract. Somewhere beneath the machines keeping him stable, something in him already understood that the word family had just changed its meaning forever. There are conversations that only happen when someone believes they may be running out of time to have them, when the armor you've spent a lifetime constructing becomes too heavy to carry, and the room around you is quiet, and the person sitting beside you has already witnessed your lowest moment and chose to stay anyway. Those conversations don't get scheduled, they don't get planned. They arrive on their own terms, in the small hours, when pretending costs more than you have left. This was one of those conversations. 24 hours before surgery, Lee Hyun-woo and Adele Menza sat together in his hospital room and talked in a way he had genuinely never talked to another human being in his adult life. Not about the company, not about quarterly structures or asset management or what needed handling in his absence, about what he had actually wanted his life to feel like before the relentless providing swallowed every other version of himself whole. About a trip to the Norwegian coast he had first imagined at 26 and quietly rescheduled every single year since. About a passion for photography he'd walked away from at university the moment he decided it wasn't productive. About the particular loneliness of constructing something remarkable and having nobody in your personal life who truly understood what it had taken from you to build it. She listened the way people listen when they are completely, genuinely present, not waiting for a gap to insert themselves, just receiving everything he offered without making him feel exposed for offering it. And then she gave something back. She talked about growing up between Accra and Detroit, the disorienting reality of never fully belonging to either place, of building your identity from the unsteady ground between two worlds, about the professional precision she had cultivated partly as protection, about the specific exhaustion of being exceptional in rooms that registered her credentials immediately and her personhood much, much later. The room held both of their truths without flinching. Somewhere near midnight, the conversation slowed, not from emptiness, but because they had arrived somewhere that didn't have words yet. He looked at her in the low hospital light, her expression carrying a softness she normally kept carefully composed, and said something quiet and completely honest. "I don't know the last time I told someone something real." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked down. "Then I'm glad you're still here to practice," she said. At 6 a.m., he signed the consent form. At 7:30, he entered the operating theater. The first 2 hours were clean. Then, at the 150-minute mark, his heart rhythm collapsed. Alarms lifted sharply through the corridor. The surgical team moved with fast, controlled precision. In the waiting room, Adele heard the distant frequency shift. She closed her eyes. He was placed in a medically induced coma. 7 days, uncertain outcome. Sung Jin was notified again. He responded through his assistant. "Keep us updated." 7 days passed. Not one member of his family came to Coeur d'Alene. Not one. Adele sat in the chair beside his bed with a stack of quarterly reports she had already reviewed twice. She didn't need them. She needed something to do with her hands while she waited. The hallway outside his room stayed empty. No family arrived. Day 2. Dr. Williams sent a medical update to Sung Jin's assistant by message. The assistant replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Adele was still in that chair. Day 3. A floral arrangement appeared at the hospital's general reception desk, ordered through Kwan Tae-sok's office. The card read, "Wishing a speedy recovery." His name was misspelled. Day 4. Ye Rin sent a 43-second voice message to Hyunwoo's personal phone, which Adele was monitoring. Ye Rin said she was so worried and couldn't stop thinking about it. Then, inside that same 43 seconds, without pause, she mentioned that her London brand event had gone really well, actually. Day 5. A cousin Hyunwoo had fully funded through 4 years of university sent a single text. "Any updates? Let me know if you need anything." Nothing followed it. Day 6. Nothing at all. Day 7. His eyes opened. The first thing he saw was her face. She was already reaching for the call button before he could form a word, her voice shifting into that calm, controlled urgency that had become the most constant sound in his world. "You're safe. You're in Coeur d'Alene. I'm here. You're safe." He lay still and let that land. Then he asked the question that had been waiting behind everything since before he went under. "Did anyone come?" Her silence answered before her words did. "No." "Did anyone call?" The hospital line received messages, sent through assistants. He didn't cry. He didn't react the way grief usually announces itself. He went completely still, the deep, permanent stillness of a man in whom something foundational has just quietly and irrevocably collapsed. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, composed in a way that was more unsettling than anger would have been. "I want you to help me do something." Adele waited. "Let them believe I'm dead." She looked at him for a long, unhurried moment, not with shock, not with alarm, with understanding. And that, perhaps, was the most revealing thing of all. There is a difference between revenge and clarity. Revenge wants to wound. It wants the other person to feel the specific size of what they did. Clarity wants something quieter and more permanent. It wants to understand, to finally see without the interference of hope distorting the view. What Lee Hyun-woo designed from that hospital bed was not a trap built in anger. It was a question, the most important question of his life, asked in the only language he had left. Who are you when I have nothing left to give? Dr. Nadia William didn't agree immediately. She sat with the request for 2 full hours before she came back to his room and gave him her answer. 3 years of treating this man, watching him drive himself toward a breaking point while the people orbiting his generosity never once checked whether he was holding, had given her a particular clarity of her own. She prepared the private death certificate. She sealed it. She told no one beyond the walls of that conversation. Broderick Hale, Detroit-based attorney, a tall and methodical man who carried the specific loyalty of someone who remembered exactly who had extended him grace during the worst professional moment of his career, made the call to Sung Jin personally. His voice was measured, formal, the language of a professional delivering news he had delivered before. Unexpected complications, did not regain full consciousness, passed peacefully. Then Hale went quiet and waited. Hyun-woo watched from a secured private suite, a remote feed pulled from his Boise home security system, angled through the living spaces where people made their truest decisions. He watched the reactions arrive across a 2-hour window. He had told himself he was ready. He was not remotely ready. Sung Jin went still for 8 minutes. Then he made a call. Not to his mother, not to Ye-rin, not to a single family member. He called his financial attorney in Detroit. The conversation lasted 26 minutes. Hyun-woo couldn't hear the words through the feed, only watch the body language, the composed gestures, the occasional nod, the complete, undisturbed ease of a man processing information rather than absorbing loss. Ye-rin cried. And for 30 seconds it was real, brief and raw and genuinely human. Then a visible composure arrived that came far too quickly for grief. Within minutes, she was making calls. Her brand manager first, then her publicist, then her accountant. Tae-sok High tribute post published on his professional page within 90 minutes. It included a photograph of the two of them at a business gala 3 years prior. The post gathered 412 responses before midnight. He replied to several of them with a single red heart. Grief has a texture when it's real. It stumbles, it forgets what it was doing. It circles back to the same thought 17 times. It doesn't know what to do with its hands. What he watched had none of that. It was organized, efficient, and every decision they made in those first hours told him something he could never, under any circumstances, unknow. 3 days later, Sung Jin called Broderick Hale. He wanted the estate processing timeline. He wanted to know whether board positions required a transitional vote or could be assumed directly. He wanted to know if a will existed and who held the original. He asked everything calmly, logistically, the way a man asks questions when he has already moved past the part that should have broken him. Hale reported every word back to Hyun-woo that same evening. The funeral was scheduled in Detroit, Greater Grace Temple, a Saturday. He booked a private flight that same night. There is a version of grief that is real, and a version that is performed. In a room full of people, both can look identical until you know what to look for. The emotion that reaches slightly too far. The tears that arrive precisely when someone is watching. The composure that returns a full beat too soon, like an actor who memorized the script but underestimated the timing. He had watched them through a security feed for days. Now he watched them in person, from the back seat of a private vehicle parked at the far edge of Greater Grace Temple's parking lot, Detroit, Michigan, a gray Saturday morning that felt exactly right for what was happening inside those walls. The church was full. Extended family he hadn't seen in years filled the pews. Business contacts who came for the optics of loyalty. Neighbors of his Detroit relatives who had never met him but arrived out of community courtesy. The quiet irony of it pressed against his chest. More people had shown up to mourn him than had ever, across an entire decade, shown up simply to spend time with him. Sung Jin delivered the eulogy, 11 minutes. Technically excellent, measured pacing, emotional beats placed at precise intervals, every expected word about sacrifice and legacy, and the extraordinary arc of a man who had built everything from nothing. His voice fractured twice. Both times felt like marks on a script rather than cracks in a person. Ye Rin occupied the front row in structured black, posture immaculate, expression sitting in careful balance between composure and sorrow. She had positioned herself exactly where the most eyes would find her. Tae-sak offered a brief testimonial about family and legacy and the man Hyun-woo had been. Broderick Hale would later confirm that while Tae-sak spoke, his assistant was actively emailing 2 Detroit real estate contacts regarding properties listed under Hyun-woo's estate portfolio. And then, in the third row, slightly apart from the rest, sat Cho Bok-soon, his mother's younger sister, 63 years old, small-framed, wearing a black coat that had seen better winters. She had not spoken meaningfully with Hyun-woo in nearly 2 years, not from absence of love, but from the particular difficulty of reaching someone who had elevated himself so far above the family through the very act of caring for them. She wept from the opening hymn without stopping, silently, without audience, without anyone seated near her acknowledging it. Her grief was the only grief in that building that cost her something. Even in a room full of performance, real love finds a way to surface. You just have to look past everything louder to see it. From the parking lot, he watched all of it, and something that had been quietly holding on inside him, some last stubborn reserve of hope that had survived the hospital and the 7 empty days, and Sung Jin's call to the estate attorney, finally, completely released. It wasn't anger that replaced it. Anger would have been easier. It was certainty, the specific, irreversible grief of a man who can no longer wonder. Pastor Wendell Ford, silver-haired, unhurried, the kind of man whose presence alone quieted rooms, stepped to the podium for the closing prayer. He bowed his head, closed his eyes, and began. The church doors opened, and Lee Hyun-woo walked in.
He did not walk in with drama. He didn't need to. When a man walks into his own funeral, when the doors swing open and the person everyone just eulogized is suddenly impossibly standing in the entrance in a dark coat with steady eyes, the room does every bit of the work for you. The silence broke in pieces. A woman near the back made a sound that was half word and half something language hasn't named yet. A man in the third row rose to his feet, then sat back down as if his legs couldn't agree on a decision. A young child near the aisle grabbed their mother's sleeve and held it without letting go. Cho Bok-soon stopped mid-breath, her face completely open, her grief suspended in the air between what she had accepted and what she was now seeing. Sung Jin's face moved through 4 expressions inside 3 seconds. Shock first, genuine and unguarded, the only authentic thing he had displayed all morning. Then something that briefly resembled relief, then confusion, and then settling over all of it like a curtain dropping into place, a controlled, calculating stillness. Hyun-woo recognized it immediately. He recognized it because he had spent his entire life choosing not to see it. He walked to the front of the church without hurrying. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform a single moment of what followed. He stood before the people who had eaten at his table, built their lives on his resources, spoken his name in their professional bios, and planned the division of his estate before the week was finished. And he spoke quietly. I needed to know who my family was when I had nothing left to give. He let that land. Now I know. His gaze moved around the room, unhurried, without rage, without mercy. The gaze of a man who has finally stopped protecting his own illusions. He looked at Sung-jin last. Sung-jin didn't look away. Neither did he. I would have given everything for you. I did give everything for you. But when I needed you, just to be present, you were busy. The silence that followed had weight. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Cho Bak-soon called his name, just once. Her voice cracked down the middle of it. He stopped at the door, turned back, found her face in the third row, red-eyed, small, completely unguarded. He held her gaze for one moment and gave her a single, quiet nod. Then he walked out. He didn't feel powerful leaving that church. He felt lighter. The way you feel when you set down something you carried so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. Now, here is where most stories would end. This one doesn't. Because 48 hours later, Lee Sung-jin filed an emergency petition in a Michigan probate court, a formal legal challenge to his brother's mental competency. The argument? That staging a fraudulent death constituted clinical proof of psychological instability, making every estate decision Hyun-woo had ever made legally voidable. He had begun drafting it before the funeral ended. The church was not the confrontation. It was the opening move. And for the first time in his life, Lee Hyun-woo was about to show his brother exactly who he was. There is a specific kind of violation that has nothing to do with physical force. It comes from watching someone take the most exposed season of your entire life, a hospital room, a body that failed you, a grief you never intended anyone to witness, and reconstruct it into a legal document specifically engineered to destroy you, not to hurt you, to erase you. This was that violation. The petition arrived through Broderick Hale's office on a Monday morning. Hyun-woo read it at the kitchen table of his Boise estate, the same room where he had once lain on the floor alone, reaching for a door nobody came through. He read every page without rushing. Sung-jin had hired a capable team. The argument stood on 3 pillars: the covert preparation of a fraudulent death certificate, a 7-day medical absence during which next of kin received no direct communication, and, most deliberately constructed of the 3, the claimed influence of an unvetted professional associate on his decision-making during a period of acute medical vulnerability. An unvetted professional associate. They meant Adele. They simply hadn't named her yet. Simultaneously, Kwon Tae-sok and a Detroit-based cousin named Park Ji-soo, a woman of 40 who had occupied a front-row seat at the funeral wearing a dress purchased with Hyun-woo's money, coordinated a carefully timed leak to a Detroit financial media outlet. The published story characterized Hyun-woo as increasingly erratic, isolated, and dangerously susceptible to outside manipulation. Every damaging claim was attributed to sources described only as close to the family. The article ran Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 of Hyun-woo's institutional investment partners had contacted Hale's office with questions carefully worded to sound neutral. They were not neutral. Hyun-woo sat with that article for a long time after reading it, not because it threatened his ego, not because the legal petition genuinely frightened him. He had the resources and the documentation to dismantle it completely, and every person in that legal chain knew it. He sat with it because of 3 words: unvetted professional associate. He wasn't angry about what they had aimed at him. He had expected retaliation the moment he walked out of that church. What moved through him now, cold and absolute and unlike anything he had felt through this entire ordeal, was focused entirely on what they were preparing to do to her. Adele had done nothing except pay attention when everyone else looked away. She had stayed when staying cost her professionally and personally, and Sung Jin's team was going to weaponize that loyalty and use it to dismantle her. 2 days later, his phone rang. Adele's voice came through composed, deliberately, carefully composed, the specific tone of someone managing something difficult from the inside out. I need to tell you something. 2 men came to my office this morning. Sung Jin's associates had delivered an offer in person, sign an affidavit describing Hyun Woo's mental state during hospitalization as erratic and delusional. Accept and receive full professional protection, refuse and face coordinated attacks on both her career and her immigration status. She had listened to every word without interrupting, then walked them to the door, then called him. He closed his eyes. Tell me everything they said, he told her, every single word. The hardest choices in life are never between good and evil. Those are straightforward once you see them clearly. The choices that genuinely test a person are the ones between self-preservation and integrity, between protecting your own future and protecting someone who is currently unable to protect themselves. Adele Mensah had been handed exactly that choice. She hadn't hesitated for a single second. She walked him through everything on the phone, calmly, sequentially, with the same precision that had defined every interaction they'd ever had. The 2 men who arrived at her Boise office that morning, the way they settled into their chairs without urgency, without apology, the practiced ease of people accustomed to delivering uncomfortable propositions in professional settings, the offer itself wrapped in the kind of polished courtesy that made it more troubling, not less. The affidavit they wanted carried specific language they had already drafted for her: emotionally compromised, dependent thinking, unable to distinguish personal and professional boundaries. She recited every phrase without commentary. When she finished, silence held the line between them. 11 seconds, she counted. And you said no. I walked them to the door, she confirmed. He exhaled slowly. Adele, they will follow through. They have the resources, the motive, and they will not stop at one attempt. I know, she said. Then why? Because what they wanted me to say isn't true. A pause. And because you would have done exactly the same for me. He drove to her apartment that evening. She lived in a quiet part of Boise, a book-lined space that felt completely like her, ordered without being cold, warm without being careless. He sat across from her at her kitchen table, and for a long stretch, neither of them reached for words. He looked at her hands resting on the table. He thought about every person he had ever given to, the full, exhausting ledger of it, and the particular hollowness that always followed when the giving moved in only one direction. He thought about a waiting room in Coeur d'Alene, 7 days, and a woman who never once made any of it about herself. You could lose everything you've built, he said quietly, your career, your professional standing, everything. She met his eyes directly. So could you, and you're still here. His hand moved across the table, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone for whom physical closeness is neither casual nor careless. His fingers came to rest over hers. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand gradually until their palms were resting together, and she lets the moment be what it is. By 6 the following morning, the attacks had already started. Sung Jin's team had filed formal complaints against Adele with 2 of her former institutional clients. A fabricated professional misconduct claim had been submitted to a financial regulatory body overnight. He read every filing before the sun was fully up. Then he called Broderick Hale. You build the case, he said. Everything we have, all of it. We end this.
He had fought every single day of his adult life, for stability when there was none, for success when every condition said otherwise, for the people he loved, long after they stopped deserving the energy it cost him. He had fought with discipline, with intelligence, with a refusal to accept limitation that had become so deeply wired into him it no longer felt like a choice, it felt like breathing. But this fight was different from everything that came before it, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting to provide, he was fighting to protect. And there is something about choosing to go to war for a specific person, not a principle, not an asset, not an obligation, that sharpens a man in ways nothing else can. He had never been more focused in his life. What Broderick Hale and Hyun Woo built over the following 3 weeks was not loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was methodical, layered, and constructed with the patience of two people who understood that lasting outcomes aren't decided in single confrontations. They are assembled through the careful, irrefutable accumulation of truth. Adele's professional record was the first wall Sung Jin's team ran into, and they ran into it hard. 3 years of immaculate documentation, 63 client files, every transaction audited, every communication preserved with the precision of someone who had always worked as though her integrity would one day be examined under pressure. The regulatory body reviewed the misconduct complaint in full. They found nothing, not one irregularity across 3 years of complex, high-stakes financial management. The complaint was formally dismissed within 2 weeks. Then Hale turned his attention to Sung Jin's side of the ledger. What the financial records revealed, once examined without the protection of Hyun Woo's continued silence, was 3 years of quiet, systematic theft. Consultancy fees routed to accounts that existed only on paper. Asset reclassifications that moved value from the fund's portfolio directly into Sung Jin's personal holdings. It wasn't the behavior of a desperate man making poor decisions under pressure. It was the behavior of someone who had simply never believed the day of reckoning would arrive. He had counted on his brother's generosity being permanent. He had miscalculated completely. Dr. Nadia Williams submitted her medical chronology to Hale's office without being asked twice. 41 pages, every notification sent to the family during Hyun Woo's hospitalization, timestamped and documented. Every non-response logged with the same clinical precision. The mental competency petition collapsed before it reached a full hearing. The Michigan court dismissed it. Insufficient evidence, formal notation, permanent record. Sung Jin attempted one final escalation. He approached 2 of Hyun Woo's longest-standing institutional investors, carrying fabricated internal communications. Hale's team dismantled the forgeries in 4 days. Both investors severed every association with Sung Jin's entities without public statement. Then Cho Bok-soon called Hale's office. Voluntarily, unprompted, the aunt who had wept genuinely at a funeral full of performance submitted a written statement documenting years of conversations in which Sung Jin had openly, casually discussed his expectation of inheriting Hyun Woo's estate. It was the testimony of a woman who had finally decided that loving a family didn't require protecting its worst behavior. Sung Jin was removed from every board position, every investment vehicle, every role that Hyun Woo's capital had constructed for him. No press release, no announcement, no dramatic public moment. Simply removed. Sometimes, the most devastating consequence you can hand someone who wanted everything is to make them completely invisible. "6 months. Say it out loud and it sounds like nothing. 6 months, a season, a quarterly earnings cycle, the length of a lease on a furnished apartment. But 6 months can also be the entire distance between a man lying unconscious on a cold marble floor, reaching for a door nobody was coming through, and a man who has, for the first time in 38 years, learned how to be completely still without it feeling like surrender. This is where this story was always headed. Not toward a verdict, not toward a moment where every person who underestimated him is assembled in a room to watch him win, toward something quieter than that, something that lasts longer than spectacle, toward himself. Lee Hyun-woo is in therapy now. Weekly sessions with Dr. Petra Vane, a Boise-based psychologist whose particular specialty is high-functioning individuals who have spent so long performing competence that they've lost track of who they actually are underneath it. He resisted for 3 months before he finally walked through her door. He spent the entire first session explaining, with considerable articulation, all the reasons he didn't need to be there. She listened without interrupting, then said calmly, "We can start there if you'd like." Something in him broke loose. He laughed, involuntary, completely unguarded, the laugh of a man caught off guard by his own relief. He came back the following week. He hasn't missed a session since. He established a scholarship endowment, jointly administered through the University of Idaho and Michigan State University, funding complete financial pathways for first-generation immigrant students pursuing economics and finance. No press event, no announcement. He signed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon, ate a quiet lunch by himself, and returned to his desk. The work speaks without him needing to. His company is smaller now, in certain specific ways, and more genuinely, completely his than it has ever been. Adele is still there, not as his accounts manager. That chapter closed naturally during the legal proceedings, and what replaced it carried no official title because it didn't need one. What they built together moved slowly, the way anything built on a real foundation moves. A dinner that lasted 4 hours because neither of them had any interest in it ending. A weekend at Coeur d'Alene where they stood at the edge of the lake and he told her, without rehearsing it, that she was the first person in his life he had ever felt genuinely seen by. She stayed quiet for a long time, then said, "You were always visible. You just never let anyone close enough to look." On a hiking trail outside Coeur d'Alene one evening, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "I don't want you to stay because I need you. I've needed people my entire life, and it never meant what I thought it meant. I want you to stay because I choose you, because I see you, the actual you, and I choose her." She looked at him in the mountain light, steady, unhurried, that deep brown gaze that had witnessed his worst and remained unchanged by it. "Okay," she said softly. "That was all, just okay." His family has moved on. Ye-rin still runs her brand, Tae-sok still posts about hustle, Sung-jin rebuilds quietly in Detroit. Cho Bok-soon messages him on the first of every month. Brief, warm, genuine. He always writes back. She is the only one he does. He no longer carries them. He doesn't hate them either. They are simply no longer the center of his universe. One morning he wakes early. The Boise estate is warm in a way it never was before. Adele is in the kitchen making tea the way her mother taught her, humming something low and unhurried. Morning light moves through the windows he once walked past alone. He stands in the doorway and watches her, unobserved, unperforming, simply present. He thinks of a boy in a narrow Busan kitchen, a mother counting coins, a promise made at 16 that cost him everything, and somehow, through every wrong turn and empty room and marble floor, led him exactly here. It was worth it, he thinks. Not for the reasons I believed, but it was worth it. He had spent his whole life asking the wrong people to see him. He gave everything, built an empire from nothing but will and discipline and a refusal to quit. And the lesson, the one that cost him years and a surgeon's table and a fake funeral in Detroit, was simply this. You cannot purchase presence, you cannot fund loyalty, and blood on its own is just biology. Family is who stays. She stayed, and this time, finally, completely, without a single reservation, so did he. If this story moved something in you, you already know what to do. Drop a comment right now and tell me, if you were Adele, would you have stayed? I want to read every single answer. If you're new here, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and come back, because every story on this channel is built to make you feel something real. I'll see you in the next one.